In other social media platforms, I've seen cabals of gamers associated by favoring a particular game, or by location, or by personal association. With Twitter's emphasis on quick communication with short messages to wider ranges of people, would something as intimate as a gaming group, or as widely varied as a game fan base be represented and served adequately? By investigating the D&D hashtag, I investigated the largest group of gamers interacting about what is arguably the largest and most popular tabletop hobby game, Dungeons & Dragons. The tag, like the fandom it represents, crosses intertextual boundaries, serving news and professional information, advertisement, entertainment, and interpersonal sharing. I organized the posts based on how the author was relating to their D&D experience. To approach the data without prejudice or expectation, as appropriate to grounded theory, I looked at how each message directed me. I found that the tweets were either selling me something, directly sharing news to me, or used as a venue to share aspects of gamer life with me. I divided my findings into posts relating to sharing news or advertising, posts that shared personal experiences and excited utterances, and discussions. In personal posts, advertising or sharing news were the most plentiful, representing upwards of 33% of total data. The fewest messages involved interpersonal discussion or personal sharing of gaming experiences or rules discussions. What little reshares there were involved sharing news, so I included them in a sharing category. The first communications I observed were the advertisements from companies. Gaming requires a certain buy-in of books and accessories, so it's likely that there would be a market for product. There is also something of a collector culture among hobbyists. Some take pride in accumulating rule books, large collections of dice, varied collections of miniature figures, etc. And using the tag seems to be an effective way of finding one's market. Product advertisements weren't the only kind of advertising I found. People try to drive traffic to their favorite blogs, news feeds, and other sorts of gaming information. I lumped those people driving traffic into my code for advertising. As a matter of fact, if someone was trying to direct traffic to a blog for the sake of sharing information he thought would be valuable to large portions of the community, I also identified that communication with the code I set aside for sharing news. The greatest amount of activity I saw was among people sharing news and information relating to the hobby. Much of the sharing wasn't specifically directed at anyone. Instead, it was announced to everyone in the community. The hashtag seemed to be just a way to identify that the information being presented was gaming related. It was up to the reader to go any further into the meaning of the announcement. The announcements were varied as well. Some of them directed people to news about upcoming releases of games or to Kickstarter pages for developers looking for funding. The support of fans turned producers seemed like implicit participation when people forwarded these links or retweeted these images. This boosting of stuff, it described it as the biggest type of support I observed. However, fans very rarely shared links to other advertisements. Other announcements were sharing personal experiences about games, and again, they were not directed at anyone in particular. They were demonstrations of semi-private pleasures, the intimacy of a game group made public, a certain demonstration of fan attachment, like Duffett described in his explanation of affect. The poster shares the experience so other gamers can sympathize, empathize, and commiserate. Most retweeted images were pieces of official news from different game companies. There is value placed on spreading information about the hobby, especially new news about anything being released. However, I didn't find much discussion happening with most of the news being using the D&D tag. Rather, I found links to articles discussing the original piece of news. What does that say about the values of the people using the hashtag? There's an assumption that information and news are not only valuable, but valuable enough to spread quickly. Very few sources of news had back and forth discussions. News was broadcasted out and shared again by a few. There were more unique messages than retweets or shares. There was a very limited amount of rules discussion. Tabletop RPGs are notorious for complex rules that border on the arcane. They use a particular cant that may transcend different games, but are unique to the hobby. However, very little conversation went back and forth about rules. I would have thought Twitter to be a perfect venue for the back and forth, question and answer, especially since game companies have a presence on Twitter. I wonder if perhaps the phenomenon, as I mentioned earlier, the predilection of users to broadcast statements and industry news to the whole community, as opposed to individual communication, limits the desire for ask and answer discourse. Users want readers to know what they're doing, not how they're doing it. There were comparatively few queries to the community as well. Again, with such an emphasis on distributing information in bulk, perhaps that limits the need or the inclination to ask specific questions. And perhaps there are better venues, which are pointed to in other posts. One part of gaming culture is the desire to share what happened at the table. That was an element of the community, again, on Twitter, but, again, relatively limited. There are opportunities to share in-jokes that only gamers might appreciate, as well as opportunities to share excited utterances about products or events that happen in-game. Again, they tend not to be directed at anyone in particular, but to the whole community. Often they're included with pictures from the game table, showing off minis, character sheets, or other game-related artifacts. Duffett's descriptions of how fans' accumulations are used in a social sense can be associated here as well. The stuff of the hobby is a physical representation of storytelling tools. The dice, minis, and maps are shared treasures for that moment, and the poster is sharing them with us as well. One thing that seemed to be shared among many of the messages was the chance to identify oneself as a gamer when discussing other matters. The association was often casual, identifying out-of-game incidents or items with in-game concepts. They may not have been an intentional need to identify oneself as a gamer, but again, something to share among a crowd of like-minded individuals. There were specific threads about tips for running games or elements to throw into a game to make them interesting. I saw many of them from user Sly Flourish, who has a website devoted to D&D tips and tricks for D&D players. Interestingly, what few discussions I got a chance to observe, he was usually a participant, although those discussions had little to do with his content. Few other tips were contained with posts from publications like Gygax magazine. Twitter isn't the venue where aspects of the game are created or where it's played, but it is a place where participants share about their experiences. If one were to apply Schaefer's model of accumulation, construction, and archiving, one would direct D&D users towards the low end of archivist and construction. We're not seeing a remix of previous content on the platform, but there is a display of what's important to members in the community. Sharing news, whether it's about the industry or the table, is at the forefront. Is this the social media described by Schaefer and Bastard Culture, one which claims users belong to a community, claim that mediated communication equals publishing, and claims that these practices are distinctive features of the web as we know it? Overall, the D&D community on Twitter isn't about back-and-forth discussion relating personal issues between individual players. Rather, it's a chance to voice appreciation, news, excited utterances, or items relating to gamers at large. It's a piece of shared inspiration and shared experience. The D&D tag isn't about the small, intimate group. It's akin to a bulletin board. If the small, intimate game group is and their communities on Google Plus or LiveJournal can be likened to a small study group, then D&D is the street corner philosopher crying from on top of a soapbox.